Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Parashat class. And of course, today is also Asara B'Tebet. We have Yerushalayim and Galut in mind. And we pray, of course, for the quick, speedy redemption of the Jewish people. But we are going to discuss the Parashat of the week, which is, of course, Perashat Vayigash. And here's the interesting question that I want to pose before you today. Jewish communities, when they are exiled, as they've tragically been expelled over the course of so many difficult centuries, expelled from their lands, or even indirectly expelled, where they're forced to leave their lands for different reasons of persecution, economic difficulty, etc. The question is, where should they go? In other words, what is the best protocol for a wandering community, assuming that they have some type of choice, assuming that they're not just running for their lives and they're going to lands in whatever safe haven they find themselves? By what standards should a community decide where to choose their resting place, their temporary dwelling, let's say, in exile, in the diaspora? Let's ask this right straightforward. Our community, did we make the right choice 120, let's say, years ago by choosing to come to, for the most part, New York City, besides some that went down south, some went to South America, of course. By and large, our community settled here in New York City, the 5 boroughs. Did we make the right choice? Should we have settled in some suburb, let's say? What would have been the consequences? Would we have been better off now, whether we settle somewhere else, or are we better off the way we are? Impossible to figure that out. Interesting to analyze in hindsight, but this is a question every community over hundreds and really thousands of years in Judaism have asked themselves, and quite seriously behoove them to ask themselves that question. So I believe that our Perashat Vayigash, has a lot to say on this matter. And I'm going to, in a moment, share with you our screen and actually look at the Pesukim that I believe create the framework for this discussion. While I'm getting those Pesukim, I will mention that there could very well be more than one opinion about the matter in our Parashat from the great people of our past. So here we go. Okay, so for some reason, there was a clear directive in our parasha as to where to go when Am Yisrael, the children of Yaakov, Avinu, and the whole entourage, children, grandchildren, and everyone with them needed or decided to leave because of the famine in Eretz Yisrael. And because of Yosef's existence, go to Mitzrayim. The clear directive was 2 words, Eretz Goshen. There was no question about that, as we'll see. Choosing residence in exile is our title. And let's go through really 5 sources that mention Eretz Goshen. The first one is Yosef himself. When he revealed to himself to the brothers, Ani Yosef, here I am, don't feel bad, God sent me here. And he went through with them what his vision is for their survival. The first pasuk up here, he said very clearly, V'yashavta be'eretz Goshen. You, the family, will dwell in Eretz Goshen. V'hayita karov elai, you'll be close to me. Atal b'ncha b'nei b'ncha, v'sonecha b'karecha v'chol ashelach. Everything, all you and your possessions will be close to me, and you will have a family settling. V'chilkalti otecha sham. The next pasuk says, and I will sustain you there. We'll get back to that pasuk and analyze it in terms of the possible different aspects in that pasuk. But first, let's go to the sources. Then we see Yaakov, when he is guiding the family to go down, it says, well, he first sends Yehuda forward in front of, in advance of the rest of the family to Yosef. And here's the interesting term, lehorot lefanav goshna. Lehorot means to guide in front of him Goshna, towards Goshen, Vayabo Arsa Goshen. And subsequently, the rest of the family came to Eretz Goshen. Third source. This is when they actually arrived to Mitzrayim, and Yosef told the brothers, listen, I'm going to have to introduce you to Paro, and I will. This is what I want you to say. I want you to say that we are people, we're shepherds by trade, we have herds, we have flocks, and I want you to tell Paro that we've always been this way, because I want you to make sure that he agrees to settle you in, of course, Eretz Goshen. Gives a reason, because Mitzrayim won't like the idea of shepherding and flock, and they worship these animals, so it's abomination for them. All right, set Paro up to by default ask you to live in Eretz Goshen. Finally, when the brothers came to Paro, this is the fourth source over here that I'm pointing to. They told Paro, listen, we came because we have no place for our flocks to graze. And the famine's terrible. We came from Eretz Canaan, faithfully following the directive of Yosef. They asked Paro, pretty please, can we live in Eretz Goshen? And then afterwards, Paro told Yosef from the bottom, hey, the land, the fat of the land, all of the bounty of Egypt is before your family, and let them live in, you guessed it, Eretz Goshen. So first, let's identify this. It sounds like, just from the phraseology, that Eretz Goshen is a different land. It is not. It's located in northern Egypt on the east side of the Nile River, but it's part of Egypt, Eretz Goshen. So what is with this obsession of Eretz Goshen? So I think I want to just take first Yosef's perspective, the approach of Yosef HaSadik. Why was he so heck bent on getting them to Eretz Goshen? And I think that the pasuk, the first source where Yosef tells the brothers about his plan, is pretty clear, and Abarbanel breaks this down nicely for us, that Yosef had very basic reasons for choosing Eretz Goshen. Let's go back up to the first source, and you see that backslash red line is there to divide this pasuk and a half into three. And here it is. First one is V'yashavta be'eretz Goshen v'hayita karob elai. It's going to be very beneficial to you to be close to me. So his capital, wherever his palace was located, was close there, Eretz Goshen. So that's an advantage, but not too close. The next part of the pasuk, Atal banecha u'bnei banecha. Listen, it's going to be a place that's beneficial to family. In other words, your family will be able to remain together for whatever reason in Eretz Goshen. And the third reason is, V'chalkalti otcha sham. I'll be able to provide for you, to sustain for you. Let's just wrap this in to two major reasons, and that is family and sustenance. What could be more practical than that? So I'm going to come back to that screen soon. Let's talk about Yosef. He's so pragmatic. We know that he believes in dreams. We know he's so spiritual, connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but here, he's so practical. What's behind this practical approach? I think the answers really are in this parasha, where we have two very emotional encounters between Yosef and others. In both of them, he cries. The first one, of course, is when Yosef reveals himself to the brothers, still in Mitzrayim. And the first thing he does after his mini speech is that the pasuk says, "Vayipol asavere Benyamin achiv, vayepk alehem uBenyamin v'chal savara." Famously, it says that he fell on the neck, meaning that he embraced Benyamin, and the Hachamim point out savere is in plural, the necks, so to speak, of Benyamin, and Benyamin did the same. However, it says savara. The word neck in singular. Hachamim point out that the pshat is, the Hachamim that follow the pshat just say very simply that, it said that's the linguistic style. You can say of the Pesukim. And, therefore, it's not a big surprise that the Pasuk used that. Hachamim, famous Midrash, say that Yosef detected the fact that Bet HaMikdash would be in the portion of Binyamin, it would be destroyed twice, and therefore the plural of Nek, he somewhat prophetically, although he wasn't a prophet, cried for not just the emotional moment, but for the future. And Binyamin, who knew that the Mishkan would be in Shiloh, which is the portion of Yosef, cried for that Mishkan, singular. Okay, the next episode is when he finally met up in Mitzrayim, when Yaakov came down with his father, that powerful dramatic scene, and it says, Vayera elav, vayipol al savarav, vayeb al savarav od. Here's Yosef crying profusely on his father. Interestingly, his father doesn't say that he cried. In his famous Midrash, reading Kriyat Shema, separate discussion, which we won't get into right now. But we do see in both of these scenes, you have Yosef crying hysterically more than the other party, seemingly in this emotional embrace. And why is that? I think it's clear. Yosef spent most of his life at this point as a stranger in Galut, in exile, alone, under the heavy burden of the diaspora. And he understood what the pain of exile is, of loneliness, of being a stranger. And it's almost as if he was telling his brother and his father through his cries, I'm dying out here. I'm getting killed. And he learned what survival means and how critical survival is. And therefore, his number one priority, at least for his family, even though he was a spiritual connected person who had one eye on the future, he had great foresight, yet when he thought of his family, he was a pragmatic operator. And he said, you guys are coming into Galut. I got to think of family, and I got to think of your economic climate. You need to be able to survive. And therefore, my family, the best thing that I could wish upon you in terms of residence is Eretz Goshen. Your family will remain united, and I'll provide for you, and you'll be sustained, and you'll be successful, both in family life and economically speaking. That was Yosef's very pragmatic, practical approach as a victim of the exile, survival. But along comes Yaakov Abinu. And I believe, in my opinion, that Yaakov had a different perspective than his son Yosef. And if we go back to this pasuk, which we will now for a moment, and look at the way that Yaakov framed his plan to go to Eretz Goshen. Vet Yehuda, second source, Shalach lefanav Yosef lehorot lefanav Goshna. What does that mean? To teach. Really, lehorot means to teach or to guide. So the Pashtanim, the Hachmei Perashat, very simply say that lehorot meant that he had to set up shop. In other words, he had to perceive their arrival by basically, putting together the foundations of living, whatever that means, water, sewer system, whatever that means. Lehorot lefanav. But Hachamim, again, famously say here that Yaakov Abinu, from the word lehorot, to guide or to teach, wanted him to set up a bet midrash. What is the message of Hachamim? And based on that, what is Yaakov Abinu trying to convey to us regarding the choices of settlement and residence in exile? And that, I think, is very clear and very direct. And in fact, the word lehorot, to teach or to guide, lefanav, in front of him or before him. Most people say that means he sent Yehuda to Yosef, lehorot lefanav, to guide before him, before Yaakov, before the family. I think possibly lefanav meant before Yosef. And he was trying to teach Yosef a lesson. And that is the number one priority, the highest standard by which one can possibly decide where to reside and where to settle when tragically we're expelled or at least forced to migrate from our place of dwelling, as we have so many times in our history, in our difficult exile, is to find the place. Physical survival is critical. It's important. We have to sustain ourselves. We need family life. but we have to accommodate first for our spiritual growth. If we are not in an environment that fosters the ability for us to stick to our traditions, to remain committed to Torah and Mitzvot, without challenge, without opposition, without the dangers of assimilation, you could take all the family life and economic sustenance and success, and you could throw it you nowhere, because it's going to be short-lived, and we're not going to survive for very long. And therefore, physical survival pales in comparison for our ability to survive as a connected, committed, traditional community and nation in this long and difficult exile. And therefore, Yaakov said, my dear son, I agree with you on your choice of Eretz Goshen, but not for your reasons. I agree with you because despite how practical and pragmatic you are being with our survival, but the priority must be our spiritual survival. We must perpetuate our tradition, make sure never to put ourselves in risk at all from assimilation and anything that threatens our commitment to Torah and Mitzvot in the difficulties of the diaspora. That, my son, is the top standard and the main basis of determination of where you go in exile. It happens to be that they both chose Eretz Goshen. There was a nice old-fashioned machloket, a nice dispute here between Yosef and his father Yaakov, the sagely prophet and the more experienced one. Basically, I would say putting Yosef in his place and giving him what should be the priority and the basis of decision-making of where to go. Our community, I can't say if we made the right choice, how better off or not as good we'd be if we settled in, I don't know, one of the suburbs or somewhere in the sticks. Who knows? Maybe not as well, maybe better off, but maybe not.
As Moshe maybe the Sudan.
Okay, let's. I'm not the one to say, and we'll never know the answer to that. But clearly, what Yaakov Abinu has taught us is that survival in exile is not based on physical survival, although necessary. It's absolutely based on the continuity of our way of life, of our Torah and Mitzvot. And that is all history has taught us, that has given us the right and the ability thousands of years later to be sitting here in a Perashat class in a holy community, still keeping the traditions of thousands years old of community, keeping to our Torah and Mitzvot, and B'ezrat Hashem, by the communities in diaspora keeping these great traditions. This fast day, as the Navi Zechariah clearly tells us, will be transformed into a day of simcha and celebration in the coming of our full Geulah b'mehera b'yameinu.